developer Konami's long-awaited Metal Gear Solid 3 remake, MGS Delta Snake Eater, is finally in our hands on PlayStation 5 and PS5 Pro today, ahead of its August 28th release. More to come on the Xbox Series X and S versions, as and when we have code, but based on the PS5 edition here, it presents as a beautifully realised rendition of an action stealth classic. It's also crucially one that's faithful in many ways to the 2004 PS2 original, while justifying its existence thanks to a stark visual upgrade afforded by Unreal Engine 5. Just as we saw in an earlier comparison to the Master Collection release of MGS3, every aspect of Delta's jungle layout sticks to that original blueprint. Even its cutscenes rely on the same motion capture data, down to the frame, as directed by Hideo Kojima all those years ago. In being rebuilt on UE5 though, we're getting a thoroughly transformed take on the experience. Character models, effects, materials, lighting are all brought to the cutting edge, complete with a global illumination system for indirect light bounce and shading, likely via UE5's software-based Lumen GI. All combined, and in sticking to the tight, segmented area layouts, divided by fader blacks as on the PS2 original, MGS Delta's level of detail can afford to be dialed up to a remarkable degree as a result, often making it a marvel to look at. The catch is that in testing both PS5 consoles, there is an issue that cannot be ignored: the performance level. On base PS5, you get two modes, a 60fps performance mode and a higher res 30fps quality mode with boosted settings. The issue is that the 60fps option on base PS5 struggles to actually stick the landing, notably across the jungle areas of the first mission, where it's too often bouncing between 40 to 60fps, and even going down to the 30s while swimming underwater. More concerning is the state of PS5 Pro, which you'd hope would be an improvement. PS5 Pro has no graphics mode toggle at all, and rather, Konami combines the benefits of both base PS5 modes into one single way to play. That is, the boosted settings of the quality mode, but running at 60fps. This all-in-one approach fits the mission statement Mark Cerny had for PS5 Pro, but the problem is that performance at 60fps struggles, and in fact, in this configuration, PS5 Pro can run at a lower frame rate than base PS5. Let's go straight to the base PS5 mode comparisons before we get to the Pro situation. In terms of pixel counts, base PS5's performance mode runs at between 720p to 1080p, while the quality mode ranges between 1080p to 1584p, surprisingly higher than the 1440p peak suggested in the menus. In both cases, this reconstructs to a 4K final frame. Looking through the licenses page in Delta's menus on PS5, there's also actually a mention of AMD's FSR3 upscaler halfway down the page, though it's very possible that this is only in reference to the PC release. Either way, clearly, the quality mode is providing the upscaler more pixel data to construct a sharper, crisper frame, though breakup on fine detail like Snake's beard, fences, or swaying grass does cause all the expected issues. Especially on the performance mode, there's disocclusion artifacts, an often fuzzy look to dense moving detail, and sadly Delta's busy jungle backdrop sets the scene perfectly for those artifacts to appear. In terms of settings upgrades, the quality mode's drop to 30fps gets you more than just a res boost. Firstly, it increases small object draw distances for rocks or leaves strewn across the jungle. Up close, all scenery detail eventually draws in, but this boost does help to reduce the visibility of pop-in as Snake moves forward. Otherwise, texture resolution is identical in switching between the two modes, as is overall foliage density ahead. In a similar vein, shadow level of detail is improved on the quality mode, meaning we get higher accuracy shadows rendered at range on quality mode, whereas the performance mode requires stepping a few paces forward to see them. Finally, and most crucially, The global illumination setting is improved for outdoor jungle areas. This again takes full screen switching to catch between the two modes, but the GI upgrade affects the shading and simulated light bounce between trees and under plants. As a result, there are deeper pockets of shade in spots on the quality mode, while in other places the scene is brightened as a byproduct of light reaching more points in the scene. Just one final point, even on base PS5's performance mode, all cutscenes run using the quality mode's upgrades, and with a 30 FPS cap in place too, meaning there's really no difference either way. Jumping over to PS5 Pro, we retain all the base PS5 quality mode enhancements in object LODs, the improved shadow LODs, and the upgraded GI. Curiously, switching between Pro and base PS5's quality mode, there's a further difference to the GI setting on the newer mid-gen refresh console. Ambient occlusion, shading, beneath plants on PS5 Pro is often thicker. In other words, all of the quality mode upgrades are here combined with the performance mode's 60 FPS target, making it, in theory, a best of both worlds solution. Perhaps the more radical change though is that PS5 Pro switches to Sony's PSSR upscaler, where, based on the PlayStation blog last year, the promise is that PSSR helps Pro to a smoother frame rate overall. Konami adjusts the native resolution as well, now putting PS5 Pro at a dynamic 756p to 1152p. So on paper, that's at least an upgrade on base PS5's performance mode, while falling short of the quality mode in raw pixels pushed. Still, you'd hope the PSSR factor, the hardware-accelerated AI upscaling, might help to bridge the gap in clarity. To an extent, it is a benefit, but sadly, PSSR also introduces its own issues in the process. On the positive side first, in motion, PS5 Pro has an advantage next to both modes on base PS5. Note Snake's beard and hair in this looping shot, where PSSR more adeptly cleans up the coarse, flickering artifacts as he turns. Likewise, and notably when compared to the 60 FPS performance mode, PS5 Pro's method is better at dealing with occlusion artifacts, as an object obscures geometry for a few frames. Repeating the test over and over, the result is less flickering on busy mesh patterns, creating a more stable image with PSSR. On to the downsides next for PS5 Pro. Point number one is that often you'll notice that PSSR appears to resolve details to a lower resolution overall. Zooming in by 4 times on a still moment, distant details like grass resolve to a crisper result via base PS5 scaling method, surprisingly, even on the performance mode. Partly this is the upscaling method, but there's also the raw resolution metrics to consider, which are on average lower on PS5 Pro before the upscale even begins. So I put this to the test. For example, this early shot overlooking the jungle ahead puts base PS5's performance mode at 864p in this exact frame, the quality mode at 1412p, and then PS5 Pro trails behind at 756p in this moment. In other words, PS5 Pro has less pixel data to work with it often running at the lowest 756p value of its DRS range. So it's a win in motion for PS5 Pro, with a smarter handling of occlusion artifacts and swaying grass, but if left to settle, the resolved, reconstructed image on PS5 Pro seems to struggle to match the clarity of base PS5. The final point is perhaps the most frustrating, that PSSR doesn't always properly denoise the image. We've seen this before in the likes of Silent Hill 2 Remake at the PS5 Pro's launch. The result in MGS Delta's case is that there's an increase in shimmer all round on global illumination around interiors, with shading on walls flickering more so than base PS5. To be clear, both PS5 machines have an obvious issue with GI flickering around the lab complex a few hours in. This is without doubt a weak point for Delta's delivery on PS5 and does need addressing. But PSSR appears to accentuate the problem, adding more flicker, more temporal instability to areas where there's no issue on base PS5. It's even noticeable across the shaded patches under grass on PS5 Pro, resulting in more shimmering while outdoors. Overall, the Pro enhancement here is hard to celebrate when there are as many drawbacks as benefits, and worse still, Pro users are stripped of the option to use any other mode or scaler. MGS Delta's performance is also a disappointment. The performance mode on base PS5 targets 60 FPS, and the outlook is reasonable to start at least. Snake's initial landing area on the Virtuous mission, the Crocodile Swamp, and a late bridge section all run at between 48 to 60 FPS, with frame rates more often resting at the upper end of that range. In other words, it's ideal VRR material for those with displays supporting that technology, and with VRR active, you should get a perceptually smooth experience. This all changes, however, once you hit Razvet, the early compound filled with Ocelot's guards. The high enemy count here, plus those explosive barrels, all conspire to tank that frame rate during combat, and we're more realistically operating at between 30 to 50 FPS. I've taken the more run and gun approach in this case, but even sticking to stealth, this does sadly fall outside the VRR window on PS5. The other performance hotspot, it seems, relates to swimming underwater. Later swamp areas and a boss battle with the Pain all run reasonably well at 50 to 60 FPS up until you dive beneath the water surface, in which case the reading tanks to 40 FPS and even just under. MGS Delta on base PS5 has a serious range in performance then, and there are action-heavy segments where you'll spend more time under 60 FPS than at the mark. As an aside, John and Rich have seen the Xbox Series X build at Gamescom, and while we can only provide limited impressions going by eye, it does seem Series X has similar performance issues to PS5 in targeting 60. Base PS5's 30 FPS quality mode is up next, and there's an issue here too. Firstly, and obviously, the 30 FPS cap here runs with uneven frame pacing, which adds judder to motion. The game's motion blur setting helps to an extent, but it's simply not ideal. Compounding this issue is the fact that there are genuine drops beneath 30 FPS at stress points, like the sight of exploding barrels or diving underwater. So, despite the improved visual settings on base PS5's quality mode, and running at a clearly higher resolution on average, the trade-off in playability makes it hard to recommend. Of course, this 30 FPS cap is impossible to avoid on base PS5 in cutscenes, as both modes run all scripted scenes at 30 FPS with that uneven cadence of frames. Moving on to PS5 Pro, matters are made simpler, of course, by having only one means of playing the game at 60 FPS. Cutscenes, in this case, run entirely uncapped to 60 FPS, which on the plus side means no uneven frame pacing at 30, but on the downside, they're often way off the mark with a range of 40 to 60 FPS. The other surprise is that PS5 Pro's frame rate in actual gameplay is, on average, lower than base PS5's performance mode. The initial landing area immediately shows dips under 60, for example, whereas there are none on base PS5, and the divide only widens from that point. As we progress to the swamp and then later the bridge, it's more of a challenge for VRR to engage properly with fewer frames, and certainly so once we get to combat in Razvet at 30 to 60 FPS. For perspective, in comparing the two PS5 machines directly with a matched route, the base model is enjoying up to a plus 7 FPS advantage over Pro hardware. Every segment of the jungle, it seems, takes preference to the lower LOD and GI settings of base PS5's performance mode, plus its lower DRS range, and of course the absence of PSSR as an upscaler. Really, it's hard to see an upside here when, again, PS5 Pro users are stripped of a graphics mode toggle, leaving no backup option behind. It's also tempting to imagine how the base PS5 setup, with its lower settings, might have run on Pro hardware if left exactly as is, and if we'd have actually locked closer to 60 FPS in that case. On the plus side, some areas do run better on Pro overall later on. The lab area, for example, a few hours into the game does hold closer to 60 on PS5 Pro, while base PS5 falls shy with a 50 FPS reading. For interior sections then, Pro might have an advantage, but certainly for outdoor jungles, the results are a clear, unexpected downgrade. As a remake project, Metal Gear Solid Delta has a great deal going for it. It's clear that Konami has carefully considered its balance between honouring the 2004 original and bringing its visuals and controls up to date. It even includes a neat string of extras like the Snake vs Monkey minigame, a suite of colour grading filters, and an option to revert to the MGS series' signature controls. In light of all that attention to detail, it's a surprise then to find performance is a lesser priority for Konami, on PS5 consoles at least. Optimistically, there's still potential for a day one patch to save the day, and for the record, these tests are running on version 1.1.1. But, based on the evidence here, there's a lot to address in performance terms, with the PS5 Pro edition being the most in need of attention. That's all from me today though. If you did enjoy this analysis, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for instant notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video and many more, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly, you know where to find me. But from me for now, thanks for watching.